My husband offered me a poisoned avocado smoothie. He said, "The smoothie is good." And I replied, "I don't know, baby. Your mother drank it." In that instant, my husband went into a panic and ran to his mother's room. Inside, she was lying on the floor, completely limp. It turned out my husband had planned to poison me to keep my inheritance. Before we begin, please leave a comment letting us know what part of the world you're watching this story from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so the channel can grow and bring you more fascinating stories. Now let's get started. That morning, the small house where Nyala and Kaylin lived was as quiet as ever. The aroma of fresh brewed coffee permeated the neat, orderly atmosphere. At the table, Nyala was preparing a simple breakfast of toast and fried eggs. She didn't just wake up early out of habit. She liked feeling the stillness of the house while Kaylin was still asleep. Although, of course, that stillness had a different meaning now than it did before. The old Kaylin would have woken up with a smile, hugged her from behind, and asked with a mischievous spark, "What do we have for breakfast today, my love?" And Nyala, laughing, would have cracked a joke back. But that custom had disappeared. For almost 2 months now, Kaylin had been waking up with an expressionless face, or worse, the first thing he did upon opening his eyes was check his cell phone without greeting anyone. That morning was no different. Kaylin walked toward the table without even looking at Nyala, pulled out his chair, sat down, and started typing something on his phone. Nyala watched him for a moment, waiting for a greeting, a smile, or at least a good morning. But there was nothing. "Honey, breakfast is ready," she said softly, struggling to keep her tone gentle. He responded dryly, without looking up. Nyala felt a tightness in her chest from this change she couldn't comprehend, but she forced a slight smile. She sat opposite him, contemplating the husband who, although separated only by a table, felt more distant than ever. Several minutes passed in silence. Kaylin put down his phone and started to eat. After the first bite, he dropped his fork with a slight clatter. "It's too salty," he mumbled. Nyala was a bit surprised. "Oh, I'm sorry, baby. Maybe next time." "Next time, don't just throw it together any old way." He didn't shout it, but it was enough to silence her. That monotone voice hurt more than if he had raised his voice. Nyala knew the problem wasn't the breakfast. Something inside her husband had changed, something cold, inaccessible. But she didn't reply. She just nodded in silence. In the afternoon, Nyala was sitting in the living room folding laundry. Kaylin had left around noon saying he had work at the office, but she knew that lately, work was becoming an increasingly frequent excuse. Kaylin was arriving later and later, sometimes past midnight. When she asked him, the answer was always short. "A lot of work." The old Kaylin always kept her in the loop. Nyala looked at the wall clock. The hands moved with exasperating slowness, as if they didn't want to advance, making the house even quieter. She held one of Kaylin's freshly folded T-shirts and sighed deeply. An inexplicable emotion squeezed her heart. It was like feeling that something dangerous was approaching without knowing where it was coming from. She tried to distract herself with a book, but the pages turned without her retaining anything. Anxiety followed her like a shadow. When night fell, Kaylin finally returned. The door opened with a certain abruptness, as if he were in a rush. Nyala, who was on the sofa, turned her head. "You're home, honey?" she asked softly. Kaylin hung up his jacket without looking at her. "Yeah." "Did you have a lot of work? You got in late yesterday, too." Kaylin stopped for an instant and looked at her. His eyes didn't show anger, but rather a calculating sharpness. "What's wrong with you? You don't stop interrogating me. Do you suspect me of something?" Nyala quickly shook her head. "It's not that, baby. It's just that I worry. You're out very late way too often." "I told you it's work," he said, and went to the bedroom. Kaylin's tone tightened Nyala's chest again, not because of the volume, but because of the coldness. That night, Nyala couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling and turned everything over in her mind. Kaylin was already sleeping deeply, but his face looked different, tense, like someone hiding something. Nyala turned toward him. "Baby, "What's wrong?" she whispered softly, knowing she wouldn't receive an answer. She went back to looking at the ceiling, trying to remember when the change had started. Was it when his mother, Mrs. Calloway, started getting sick? When Kaylin began going out more often? Or when he started asking about the family savings? There wasn't a clear answer, only a premonition that was becoming stronger and more piercing. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her heart was beating too fast. The sensation wouldn't go away. Something abnormal was growing in that house. And Nyala knew that whatever it was, it would drag her in a direction she didn't want to go, but she didn't know what it was yet. Only one thing was certain. Kaylin was no longer the man she knew. 2 weeks had passed since Kaylin's change in attitude had become more evident. Nyala tried to go about her days normally, but every gesture from her husband seemed to have a hidden meaning she couldn't decipher. They lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, but the distance between them was growing more and more. That morning, Nyala was writing down the kitchen products she needed in a small notebook she always kept. It was her custom to keep a log of household expenses to manage the home in an organized way. Just as she had finished writing rice on a new page, Kaylin approached suddenly. "What is that?" he asked abruptly. "The grocery list, honey," Nyala replied gently. "We're out of a few things." "Give it here." Nyala hesitated for an instant before handing him the notebook. Kaylin scanned it page by page. His eyes moved rapidly, like an accountant auditing a small business. "We spend too much," he said finally. Nyala was surprised. "What expenses, baby? It's all basic necessities." Kaylin pointed at some entries. "Soap, detergent, oil. You buy these things too frequently." Nyala blinked, confused. "But we use them daily." Kaylin snapped the notebook shut. "From now on, I'll manage the money. You don't need to buy so many things." His voice was firm, almost an order. There was no room for discussion. He put the notebook in his jacket pocket without asking for permission. When the door closed after Kaylin left, Nyala stood there, stunned. A husband managing the finances could be normal, she knew that, but the way Kaylin had done it was strange. He seemed like someone who wanted to completely control the cash flow without a clear reason. During the day, Nyala went to her mother-in-law's room, Mrs. Calloway, to bring her lunch. The elderly woman's health had worsened in recent weeks. She lacked strength, her voice cracked often, and sometimes she seemed absent. Nyala sat on the edge of the bed and placed a bowl of puree on a small table. "Mama Calloway, you have to eat," she said with tenderness. Mrs. Calloway turned her head slowly. "Thank you, child." Nyala helped her eat, knowing it was hard for Mrs. Calloway to lift her arms. Her gaze lingered on the older woman's face. She had dark circles under her eyes and pale skin. Nobody knew the cause of her illness. The doctor had only said it was exhaustion and a lack of nutrients. While she fed her, Nyala asked, "Mama, did you take your morning medicine?" Mrs. Calloway nodded weakly. "Yes, Kaylin gave it to me." Nyala fell silent for a moment. Although Kaylin used to take care of medicines, only a month ago he wasn't this close to his mother. Even living in the same house, he often forgot to visit her. Now it was quite the opposite. Kaylin went in and out of Mrs. Calloway's room very frequently. He gave her the medicines, controlled her food, and had even locked the medicine cabinet, keeping the key himself. The change was too drastic not to arouse suspicion. "Kaylin takes very good care of you lately, doesn't he?" "Yes," Mrs. Calloway said with a weak voice, as if trying to remember. "Yes, child." Nyala responded, although inside she no longer knew if that was true. When Nyala was getting ready to help Mrs. Calloway lie back down, a glass on the nightstand caught her attention. At the bottom remained a liquid residue of a greenish color, like a smoothie that had sat for half a day. Nyala picked up the glass and smelled it slowly. It smelled like avocado, but there was something else mixed in, something that made her want to put the glass down immediately. "Mama, did you drink a smoothie earlier?" she asked cautiously. "Yes, Kaylin made it for me in the morning," Mrs. Calloway replied in a low voice. "He said it was for me to get my strength back." Nyala's heart started to beat faster. During the last 2 weeks, Kalen had brought drinks to his mother frequently, something he had never done before. But Nyala tried not to rush. She didn't want to draw conclusions without proof. She tried to think logically, but fear was starting to germinate slowly. That night, Kalen returned with several shopping bags. For a moment, Nyala was happy, thinking her husband had returned to his old self, but while helping him unload the bags, she noticed something strange. They were all full of expensive products: imported cookies, energy drinks, top-quality meat, gourmet cheeses. These weren't basic necessities, but indulgences that went way outside their usual habits. "Honey, what is all this?" Nyala asked carefully. Kalen put things away without looking at her. "To have reserves. But this is too much, baby. And the money? Why do you always talk about money?" "You have a big inheritance," Kalen snapped abruptly. Nyala froze. That phrase had never come out of Kalen's mouth before. Not even when they got married was he the type of man who mentioned assets. "But that's for the future." Kalen turned around. His gaze was sharp. "Yes, our future, not just yours." It wasn't the answer that made Nyala tremble, but Kalen's tone of voice. It contained a sure ambition, as if that inheritance were already in his hands. The night wore on. Nyala sat alone in her room, looking at the expense notebook she could no longer touch. While Kalen showered, her thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. Kalen's change in attitude, the unexplained expenses, his sudden need to control all the money, the drinks for Mrs. Calloway, and now the explicit mention of Nyala's family inheritance. These small pieces formed an unfinished puzzle, but the direction was already clear. Something was wrong. And for the first time, Nyala began to feel truly afraid. Not a simple unease, but dread, as if a danger were approaching her slowly but inexorably. During the last few days, Kalen's change in attitude had made Nyala barely able to guess what was happening. But that afternoon, when the sun was starting to set and the house felt quieter than usual, Kalen appeared with an unusual expression, a slight smile that, although forced, attempted to look warm. Nyala was folding some of Mrs. Calloway's towels when Kalen called her from the kitchen. "Nyala, come here a moment." His voice, although dry as usual, tried to sound kind. Nyala, with her heart on guard but not wanting to jump to bad omens, walked slowly toward there. Upon entering the kitchen, she saw Kalen with the blender in his hand. A light avocado aroma floated in the air, mixed with another less perceptible smell. On the table was a glass of pale green smoothie. It looked waterier than the avocado smoothies they used to make together. "Are you tired?" Kalen asked without looking directly at her. "I made an avocado smoothie. I know you like it." Nyala nodded in silence. She loved avocado smoothies, but this one looked different. The color wasn't uniform. Some parts were lighter and others darker, as if it hadn't been mixed quite right. Nyala stared at the glass longer than normal, and Kalen, with a certain rush, pushed it closer to her. "Drink, Nyala. Taking care of my mother must be exhausting. You need to replenish your strength," he said, pushing the glass a little more toward her. Nyala felt a strange premonition, but she smiled slightly. It was rare for Kalen to prepare a drink for her, and even more so with that attitude so soft. Still, she didn't want to suspect or draw rash conclusions immediately. She picked up the glass with both hands and smelled it slowly. It smelled of the familiar avocado, but there was also a slight bitter touch that usually wasn't there. "What avocados did you make this with?" she asked, trying to sound natural. "With the ones that were in the fridge." His answer was very fast, almost rehearsed. Nyala examined the smoothie again. The texture was too liquid, as if he had added more water than necessary. She stirred it slowly with a straw, but it still looked strange. Kalen was staring at her, almost without blinking. "What's wrong? Don't you like it?" "It's not that." Nyala looked for an excuse that wouldn't offend him. "Normally you don't go to so much trouble." Kalen let out a little laugh, but it sounded dry. "Well, I wanted to help a little, Nyala. You aren't going to suspect me just for doing something nice for my wife, are you?" His voice tried to sound joking, but there was a tension barely perceptible. Nyala noticed something anomalous, not just in the smoothie, but in Kaylin's gaze, which seemed to be waiting for something. What that was, she couldn't guess. She raised the glass and brought it to her lips, but she didn't drink immediately. Kaylin kept looking at her as if he were going to ensure she drank it all. Nyala's heart accelerated. "I'll drink it later," she said quickly with a smile. "I have to see how your mom is first. She seemed a little dizzy earlier." Kaylin, in a reflex action, grabbed her arm. "Drink a little, Nyala, so you'll have more energy." Nyala felt a chill. That insistence was unnatural. Kaylin never forced her that way. She swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. She made the gesture of bringing the glass to her lips, but she didn't drink. She only wet her lips slightly so Kaylin would believe she had tasted it. Yes, I'll finish it later," she said with a forced smile. Kaylin finally let go of her hand. "All right, if you need anything, tell me." Nyala nodded and, with the glass in her hand, left the kitchen. Upon reaching the hallway that led to Mrs. Calloway's room, she slowed her pace, making sure Kaylin wasn't following her. She held her breath for a moment, trying to perceive the taste on the tip of her tongue. There was a strange, slight bitterness, not the bitterness typical of an avocado, but something similar to finely ground medicine. Nyala's skin bristled. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't ignore that combination of flavors. With cautious steps, she entered Mrs. Calloway's room. Her mother-in-law lay as usual, without strength. Her face was pale, but her eyes were still open. "Are you thirsty, Mama?" Nyala asked softly, leaving the glass of smoothie on the nightstand. Mrs. Calloway nodded weakly. "Just a moment, Mama. I'll bring you water," Nyala said, looking at the glass of smoothie again. She didn't intend to give it to her. She just needed time to think about her next step. But that uncomfortable sensation had already transformed into a small fear crawling through her mind. What is Kaylin doing? And why does that smoothie have such a strange taste? Those questions followed her as she left the room, as if the shadow of the smoothie glass were clinging to her back. And without her knowing it, that suspicion was only the beginning of something much darker. From that afternoon on, the atmosphere in the house became more tense than usual. Nyala was still holding the glass of avocado smoothie that Kaylin had prepared for her, but she deliberately didn't drink anymore. The bitter taste that had brushed her lips earlier persisted faintly, reinforcing her conviction that something wasn't right. However, she struggled to keep calm, especially because Kaylin seemed to be watching her every move. When Nyala returned to the living room, Kaylin immediately looked at the glass in her hand. "You haven't drunk anymore." His voice tried to sound normal, but she still saw a nuance of insistence. Nyala smiled weakly. "I wanted to go to your mother's room first, honey. She seemed tired." Kaylin approached. His eyes betrayed a certain anxiety. "But drink first, Nyala. Even just a sip, it's fine." Nyala held her breath for a moment. That insistence felt more and more unnatural. Normally, Kaylin wouldn't care if she drank or not. An inexplicable attention forced her to choose her words carefully so as not to provoke him. "Baby, I'll drink it later. Drink first," Kaylin interrupted abruptly. Nyala took a deep breath, trying to act as gently as possible. She lifted the glass, but didn't bring it to her lips. "Honey, I tasted a little before, and the flavor is somewhat different. Maybe the avocado wasn't ripe." Kaylin's expression hardened. "It's fine. Drink a little more." Nyala swallowed hard. Time seemed to pass in slow motion, and the tension was becoming more and more real, causing a chill on the back of her neck. She thought as fast as she could of a way to get out of that situation without raising more suspicions. Finally, Nyala put down the glass and said with the most serene voice she could manage, "Honey, really, I already drank the smoothie." "You already drank it?" Kaylin narrowed his eyes. "So fast. Are you sure?" Nyala looked at him fixedly, and with a calm but clear voice pronounced the phrase that had been circling her head for a while. She said, "I don't know, baby. Your mother drank the smoothie." In a matter of seconds, Kaylin's expression changed drastically. His face went pale. His eyes opened wide and he ran out of breath. The false security he was trying to project crumbled in an instant. He didn't even have time to hide the shock. "What? What did you say? Mama drank this smoothie?" His voice was trembling, almost broken. Nyala tried not to observe his reaction too obviously. "Before, she said she was thirsty, so I left it on the nightstand. I guess she drank it herself. I haven't checked yet." Kaylin didn't wait for more explanations. He ran out toward the hallway leading to Mrs. Calloway's room. His steps were hurried, almost stumbling. The bedroom door opened violently, hitting the wall and echoing throughout the house. Nyala followed him slowly, close enough to observe the situation, but keeping her distance so as not to aggravate his panic. When she entered the room, Kaylin was already kneeling beside the bed. His face was full of terror. Mrs. Calloway lay limp, paler than usual. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing with difficulty. The empty avocado smoothie glass was on the side table. "Mama, Mama, why did you drink this? React, please." Kaylin's voice was trembling, and his panic was already uncontainable. His hands shook his mother's arm slightly, but Mrs. Calloway only emitted a weak moan. Nyala stood in the doorway with her hand on her chest. A mixture of emotions invaded her, worry for her mother-in-law's condition, and at the same time the growing certainty that her suspicions about the smoothie were correct. Kaylin turned to look at her. His eyes were red and full of an anxiety that wasn't normal. "Why did you give this smoothie to my mother?" Nyala kept calm. "Honey, I didn't force her to drink it. I just left it on the table. She might have drunk it herself because she was thirsty. Besides, didn't you say this smoothie was safe?" Kaylin opened his mouth, but no words came out. He seemed to want to blame her, but at the same time realized he was trapped in his own error. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "We have to take her to the hospital," Nyala said firmly, approaching. "She doesn't look good." Kaylin bit his lip, a mixture of frustration and terror. Yes, help me get her to the car." Although her mind was still confused, Nyala helped him. She held Mrs. Calloway's shoulders, and Kaylin took her legs. They carried her slowly to the car. During the walk, Nyala noticed how anxious and disoriented Kaylin was. His hands were unstable, his steps faltering, and he kept murmuring unintelligible things. Upon reaching the car, Kaylin started it with trembling hands. Every expression on his face showed a terror that went beyond simple worry. He looked like someone chased by a monumental consequence. Nyala sat in the back seat, holding Mrs. Calloway. She looked out the window, letting the noise of the car fill the silence, but inside she knew something had broken that night. There was no turning back. Kaylin wasn't in a panic because his mother was sick. He was in a panic because he knew what that smoothie contained, and that changed everything. Kaylin drove like a madman, hardly looking at the traffic lights. Every few seconds he glanced back at Mrs. Calloway, who lay across Nyala's knees. His mother's breathing was weak but still there. Nyala held her head, trying to make her as comfortable as possible during the trip to the nearest small hospital. As soon as the car stopped in the hospital courtyard, Kaylin jumped out before the engine completely shut off. He ran to ask for help, and 2 nurses helped move Mrs. Calloway to the ER. Nyala also went in for a moment to ensure her mother-in-law was in the hands of medical staff before leaving. When the exam room door closed, Kaylin paced from one side of the hospital hallway to the other. Nervous. His breathing was still agitated and his face was pale. But Nyala saw something else. It wasn't just the panic of a son worried about his mother. It was a deeper fear, a fear that didn't come from Mrs. Calloway's condition, but from something else. Nyala stood by the door, observing Kaylin from afar. She knew it was the perfect opportunity to carry out something that had been on her mind since the smoothie incident. Taking advantage of Kaylin being busy at the reception desk talking to a nurse, she seized the occasion. She slipped stealthily out of the waiting room and headed back to the car. Night had fallen completely, and the parking lot seemed lonelier. The light filtering from the hospital was dim, but enough for Nyala to see. She made sure no one was watching her and slowly opened the car door. The glass of smoothie she had brought from Mrs. Calloway's room had disappeared. Probably Kaylin had taken it in his panic, but the blender and the smoothie ingredients would surely still be in the kitchen at home. Meanwhile, Nyala wanted to check something more important: the water bottle Kaylin had used to make the avocado smoothie. She remembered perfectly seeing Kaylin open a small kitchen cupboard while preparing the smoothie. In that cupboard, they usually kept syrup, liquid sweetener, and mineral water. But that afternoon, she had seen another bottle of a darker color. When Kaylin made the smoothie, she heard the sound of the cap turning not once, but twice. It was a minor detail, but now it seemed crucial. Nyala opened the small glove compartment under the front seat, where Kaylin usually kept small objects. She searched carefully, but quickly: tissues, a car air freshener, receipts, and a small vial with a transparent liquid half-filled. Her hand stopped by instinct. It was a small bottle, like children's syrup, but its contents were not medicine. The liquid inside was clear and without a label, like normal water. But when Nyala slightly opened the cap and smelled it, she felt a sharp and penetrating odor, an unknown chemical smell, similar to alcohol, but more bitter and irritating. Nyala closed the cap again, her breath caught. That wasn't mineral water. It wasn't a cooking ingredient. It was something that shouldn't be in the car. She squeezed the bottle tightly. Her body trembled slightly, but she tried to keep her expression serene. If the content of this bottle was what had been used in the smoothie, then Kaylin really intended to harm her. That reality hit her harder than anything she had felt until now, but she couldn't act rashly. Accusing him without proof could make the situation even more dangerous. So, without anyone knowing, she put the small bottle in her purse. Afterward, Nyala looked around and, after making sure no one was there, slowly closed the car door. She walked back into the hospital with a light step, as if nothing had happened. When she reached the hallway, Kaylin was still pacing back and forth. He ran his hands through his hair nervously, leaving it messy. As soon as he saw Nyala returning, he turned quickly. "Where were you?" His voice was loaded with pressure. "In the bathroom," Nyala replied naturally, with the simplest voice possible so as not to raise suspicions. "How is your mom?" Kaylin wiped his hand over his face. "The doctor said they have to run tests first. They still don't know the exact cause." He couldn't continue. His face was tense and his mind clearly tangled, and that, in turn, gave Nyala a respite to think. Now she observed Kaylin with different eyes. The way he sat, restless, the way he avoided direct eye contact, the way his breathing accelerated. Everything proved that he didn't just fear losing his mother, he feared his plan would fail. Nyala sat slowly in a waiting chair. Her purse rested on her lap as always, but this time its contents were not simple personal items. Inside was hidden a truth that could explain everything. She opened her phone and noted the important details: the color of the liquid, the smell, the shape of the bottle, the place where she found it. Without exaggerations, without guesses, just the facts. In her mind, Nyala was beginning to reach a conclusion difficult to accept. Kaylin hadn't tried to hurt Mrs. Calloway. Kaylin hadn't changed because of pressure or work. Kaylin intended to hurt her, and the avocado smoothie earlier hadn't been a gesture of affection, but a trap. For the first time, the air around Nyala felt heavy, but she kept calm. Panic would only make her make mistakes. Now she had initial proof. Now she knew the truth, and from that moment on, she had to be more careful than ever because her life was in the crosshairs of the person who was supposed to protect her. The ride from the small hospital to a larger one took place in an atmosphere much quieter than the previous one. Kaylin drove at an unstable speed, sometimes too fast, sometimes braking abruptly. Nyala, sitting in the back seat, kept holding Mrs. Calloway, who lay limp. Her mother-in-law's breathing was weak, but still present, which gave her a small hope that it wasn't too late. As soon as the car stopped in the hospital courtyard, some nurses on duty immediately came out with a gurney. Seeing Mrs. Calloway's condition, Kaylin helped transfer her, but his hands trembled and his face was pale. Almost every step was accompanied by a sigh of anxiety he couldn't control. "Quick! "The patient is critical," said one of the nurses while they took Mrs. Calloway to the ER. Nyala followed with a steady step, while Kalen, in his rush, almost crashed into a glass door before stopping. He clearly couldn't hide his panic. Shortly after, a man of about 50 years, with a white shirt and a stethoscope around his neck, appeared in the hallway. His face was serene and determined, and he looked very familiar to Nyala. "Mrs. Nyala," he called her, "what happened? Why have you brought your mother-in-law here?" It was Dr. Sterling, the family doctor who had attended Mrs. Calloway for a long time. He approached, and seeing Mrs. Calloway on the gurney, his expression turned serious. "Doctor, my mother-in-law lost her strength suddenly," Nyala replied quickly. She kept her voice firm so as not to add more tension. "Please examine her." Dr. Sterling nodded without saying anything else. "Take her to the observation room. I'll examine her immediately." The nurses pushed the gurney toward the room. When Kalen tried to follow them, Dr. Sterling stopped him by the shoulder. "Wait outside a moment. I need to examine her without interruptions," he said firmly. Kalen was clearly uncomfortable waiting, but he nodded. He stood restlessly in front of the door, while Nyala, a few steps from him, kept calm despite the confusion she felt. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, Dr. Sterling came out of the exam room, closed the door silently, and seemed to meditate on something before speaking. "What happened earlier?" the doctor asked, addressing Nyala, not Kalen. At the question, Kalen's body tensed. Nyala swallowed. She couldn't reveal her suspicions directly. That could only bring about a more dangerous situation. But she couldn't lie either. "My mother-in-law ate something earlier," Nyala replied in a low voice. After that, her condition worsened rapidly. Dr. Sterling frowned. "What did she eat?" "Avocado smoothie," Nyala replied sincerely, maintaining a neutral expression. The doctor's eyes turned serious. "Just with a smoothie, her condition shouldn't have worsened that much. I just checked the initial symptoms, and there are indications of mild intoxication." Hearing the word intoxication, Kalen shuddered as if he had received an electric shock. "What do you mean, doctor?" Kalen's voice trembled. "My mother was poisoned with something." Dr. Sterling looked at Kalen fixedly. "I still can't assure it. Blood tests and other exams are needed, but the severe nausea, the weak pulse, and a somewhat strange smell on her breath, all this isn't normal." Nyala observed Kalen out of the corner of her eye. He looked like someone desperately trying to repress panic. His left hand clutched the front of his clothes and his breathing accelerated. "Doctor, will she be saved?" Kalen finally asked with a hoarse voice. "For now, she is reacting, so there are possibilities," replied Dr. Sterling. "But I need to know what she ingested. Does anyone know what ingredients were mixed in that smoothie?" There was a brief silence. Nyala lowered her head, pretending to think. Kalen covered his mouth with his hand and looked at the floor. "Just avocado, water, and sugar," Nyala replied cautiously. "I didn't see Kalen add anything else." She deliberately mentioned Kalen's name so the doctor would know who had made the smoothie without having to explain it clearly. Kalen turned instantly. "Nyala, what are you saying? The smoothie, you made it, didn't you?" Nyala interrupted him gently. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Dr. Sterling looked at both of them alternately. "All right, I'm not asking this to blame anyone, but to decide the medical treatment. Some poisons can be neutralized if acted upon quickly." Kalen nodded nervously, but his hands kept trembling. He continuously wiped sweat from his forehead, although it wasn't hot because of the air conditioning. "Mrs. Nyala," Dr. Sterling said in a lower voice, "later I will need your help to gather information at home. If there is any juice left, any bottle, or anything that seems suspicious to you, let me know. It's important." Nyala nodded in silence. "Yes, doctor." Kalen let out a ragged sigh. "Doctor, my mother will recover." "I will do everything possible," replied Dr. Sterling with a firm voice, "but you two must be honest. If there is anything I should know, tell me." Then the doctor went back into the observation room, leaving Nyala and Kalen in a hallway that suddenly seemed narrower. Niala sat down slowly, clutching her purse. Kalen stood at the end of the room, holding onto a column. His face was disfigured by a panic he could no longer hide. But for Niala, something was even clearer. Kalen's fear wasn't solely due to Mrs. Calloway's condition. He feared that what he had done was about to be discovered, and that turn of events forced Niala to be much more cautious in her next move. After a night of anxiety at the hospital and a return home full of confused thoughts, Niala realized that her fear didn't come from a single incident, but from a series of small patterns that together formed a terrifying image. She sat at the desk in her study under the warm light of a small lamp and began to note everything she had seen, heard, and felt recently. Not to accuse, but to maintain rational thought. On the first page, she noted Kalen's change in attitude, the almost non-existent greetings, the more frequent evasions, and the night outings with the excuse of work. Then she noted the new habits that had appeared suddenly, taking charge of Mrs. Calloway's medicines, locking the medicine cabinet, and now worrying excessively about what his mother ingested. She didn't describe the scenes in detail, but limited herself to brief points so the pattern was clearly visible. Next, Niala added the details related to the avocado smoothie, the strange texture, the bitter aroma that only she had perceived faintly, and Kalen's reaction when she told him Mrs. Calloway had drunk it. These small pieces, separately, didn't seem conclusive, but putting them together, they pointed in the same direction. There was an abnormal element of control and management. She paused and looked at the pen. The emotion she felt was no longer simple fear. It was a cold caution that made her brain work at full speed. Fear can lead to panic, but caution drives action. Niala chose caution. In her mind, Niala began to formulate hypotheses, possible scenarios, from the most logical to the worst. She noted each scenario on the paper and, based on the evidence she had, marked the probability of each one being true. This method helped her maintain objectivity, weighing the possibilities without getting carried away by emotions. First scenario: Mrs. Calloway's condition had worsened due to a chronic illness. This reason was plausible, but it didn't explain why Kalen had suddenly become extremely protective and controlled access to the household medicines. Second scenario: Kalen was stressed by family problems or debts, which had altered his behavior. It was possible, but it didn't explain the strange smell of the smoothie. Third scenario: the most disturbing one was that there was a premeditated intention to harm someone for a specific purpose. Although it terrified her, Niala didn't rule out that possibility, since Kalen's pattern of behavior seemed oriented toward a goal. She took a deep breath and noted the safety measures she should take without raising suspicions. First, do not confront him directly. Niala knew that a confrontation without proof could provoke an extreme reaction. Second, document the existing evidence. Record times, words, and suspicious objects. Third, protect herself and Mrs. Calloway. Never drink from a glass of unknown origin and keep her phone and wallet in a safe place. Fourth, find a way to analyze the rest of the drink or the bottles without Kalen noticing. Niala's thoughts were not limited to danger. She also considered the possibility of improving the situation. If there really were financial problems or other pressures that had changed Kalen, a different approach might help, but she refused to prioritize compassion at that moment. Safety was more important. Empathy could wait until the threat was resolved. She walked through the house slowly, observing the points that could be helpful to her. The kitchen counter where the blender was, the medicine cabinet, the small drawers. She didn't touch them, but registered their location in her mind. It wasn't a paranoid act, but one of preparation. Niala realized that the house itself felt suddenly like a battlefield she needed to map out. Then she checked her phone, opening old notes and photos to remember events she might have forgotten. It turned out there were other small things she hadn't paid attention to before. A receipt with unusual luxuries, a text message Kalen had closed in a hurry when she passed by, and some financial records whose format had changed suddenly. All this separately seemed insignificant, but together it gained importance. Between analysis and analysis, Niala felt the fatigue. Tired eyes and a heavy head forced her to stop for a moment. She drank water from her own glass, a small choice to protect herself. She also reorganized her schedule so that someone always knew where she was going. She carried a power bank with her and kept important documents in a place only she knew. These practical measures made her feel a little safer. But Nyala's caution wasn't just physical. She also began to train her communication. How to speak without provoking Kalen. How to ask certain things without offending him. And when to feign indifference. It wasn't manipulation, but strategy. Nyala knew a wrong word could ruin everything. Before sleeping that night, Nyala wrote a phrase to remind herself. Be patient, observe, and record. The phrase was simple, but it gave her a focus. She realized her suspicions shouldn't remain as a vague fear consuming her, but had to be verified with clear proof. Before closing her eyes, Nyala looked at her wedding photo with Kalen hanging on the wall. The photo still reminded her of the initial promises, to protect each other, trust each other. But now that promise felt fragile. She didn't want to destroy her home, but to save it if possible, or save herself if it wasn't. The suspicions had strengthened, but Nyala chose not to panic. That night she fell asleep with a small plan of steps in her mind and the quiet determination to find the truth without putting herself in danger. That morning the house was quieter than usual. Kalen was still at the hospital taking care of Mrs. Calloway, and Nyala took the opportunity to organize her husband's room and desk. She didn't intend to search his things. She just wanted to check if there was anything else she needed to know before moving forward. Upon opening the third drawer, usually full of receipts and thin folders, Nyala found a blue folder she hadn't seen before. The folder was clean, pristine, and dust-free, which meant its contents had been handled recently. Nyala's heart started to beat faster, not from a sudden suspicion, but because her intuition had been telling her for a long time that Kalen was hiding something. She opened the folder slowly. Inside were several official documents with the logo of a large insurance company. In the name field, it clearly said, Nyala Perez. She was speechless, feeling a chill down her back. Her right hand trembled slightly as she read the documents. The insurance sum indicated was a huge amount, far exceeding their savings. But what shocked her most was the phrase under the beneficiaries section. Kalen Rodriguez. For a moment, Nyala's stomach clenched. It wasn't the amount that surprised her, but the fact that she had never signed that insurance policy. She remembered well all the important documents she had signed. She wasn't the type of wife who simply nodded at money matters. Nyala always liked to read the details carefully, make sure everything was clear and reasonable. But this document was unknown. She sat in the chair trying to breathe, but felt an inexplicable oppression. Her gaze fixed on the signature that was supposedly hers. It looked similar, but it wasn't identical. There was a small line she never made and a curve too long. It was very subtle, but enough to prove the signature had been forged. Nyala covered her mouth, containing a sound that almost escaped her. This was no longer about Kalen's change in attitude. It wasn't about the avocado smoothie or the suspicious bottle. It was something bigger, more planned, and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She reread the document to make sure she hadn't misunderstood it. The insurance had already gone into effect 3 months ago, and the waiting period was about to end. If something happened to her, a huge sum of money would be paid immediately to Kalen. It wasn't an amount paid without reason, and it was impossible for Kalen to have taken out such a large insurance policy without a clear plan. Nyala felt her eyes heat up, not from rage, but from a mixture of terror and desolation. She remembered every moment, from the way Kalen had started to control the food to his attitude change, which felt forced. All those pieces began to fit with a brutal clarity. This proof became the center of everything, pointing to a single possibility so cruel she wanted to deny it. But Nyala didn't let herself get carried away by emotions. After a few minutes of holding her head and catching her breath, she decided to look at the other documents in the folder. There were copies of emails, approval letters, a medical report, and proof of insurance premium payments. Everything had been done regularly, in her name, and without her knowledge. Nyala closed her eyes. So that's why, she thought. She remembered the moment Kalen had first mentioned household finances, his attitude of strictly controlling expenses, and his way of starting to control small things he didn't care about before. Now everything made sense. The motive? Money. The proof of a motive that until now only existed in Nyala's imagination was now in her hands in the form of an irrefutable document. She squeezed the folder slowly and placed it back on the desk. The fear that was previously abstract had turned into concrete terror, but on the other hand, a new force was growing inside her. Not blind courage, but determination. This was no longer a matter of conjecture. It was a matter of survival. Nyala used her phone to photograph the documents, ensuring she had a copy, and then returned everything to its original place. Each sheet was handled with care so as not to leave a trace that the folder had been opened. Closing the drawer, she felt her chest was still tight, but at the same time she felt firmer. From now on, she had to take new measures, more cautious measures, and more goal-oriented. She shouldn't act rashly. She had to go through the day as if she knew nothing. When she heard Kalen's voice in the entryway in the afternoon, Nyala stood upright in the kitchen. She looked at her husband with a small, natural smile, a smile forced for her own safety. But for the first time since the suspicions arose, Nyala saw Kalen not as her husband, but as someone who had a great interest in her life ending. Now the conflict was complete, the motive was clear, and the danger real. And starting today, Nyala knew one thing. She had to act carefully because her life was no longer safe in her own home. That night, the house was too quiet to be the home of two people. Nyala had just finished tidying the kitchen when she heard Kalen's steps in the living room. Normally, after returning from the hospital, he would complain about fatigue or ask about Mrs. Calloway's condition, but that night he didn't say a word and went straight to his bedroom. That attitude put Nyala even more on alert. Shortly after, she heard the bedroom door close silently. Not a normal close, but as if he had held the handle to make no noise. The movement was so cautious that Nyala found it even more suspicious. Kalen was hiding something. She turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the dim light of a lamp in the living room. She sat for a moment trying to calm down, but anxiety wouldn't stop gnawing at her chest. She felt a strong impulse to find out what Kalen was doing. When she got up to head to the bedroom, she heard Kalen's voice through the crack of the door, barely a whisper. The volume was low, as if it were muted. Nyala stopped, took a deep breath, and approached stealthily down the hallway so as not to make noise. She stood a few steps from the door, which wasn't completely closed. Through that small opening, Kalen's voice wasn't entirely clear, but it could be understood. What froze her blood was her husband's tone of voice. It was sharp, full of pressure, as if he were confirming something grave. "Yes, it won't be long now. I just have to wait for the right moment." Kalen's voice was heard clearly this time. Nyala held her breath. She leaned in slightly, careful not to touch the door, just enough to catch every word. "No, she still doesn't suspect anything," Kalen continued. His voice sounded anxious. "But I have to hurry. I can't drag this out much longer." That sentence sent a chill down Nyala's spine. Kalen's tone wasn't that of someone complaining or talking about domestic matters. It was the tone of someone planning something urgent. There was a brief silence. The sound on the other side of the phone couldn't be heard, but Nyala could guess the direction of the conversation, and that made her stomach turn. The bedroom floor creaked slightly as Kalen moved. "Yesterday I tried. Yes, that was a mistake. She shouldn't have drunk it." Nyala felt her strength falter. She leaned against the wall to keep her balance. Kalen was talking about Mrs. Calloway. There was no doubt. "Just wait for now and be patient," Kalen said again. "When it's all over and I get the money, we'll proceed according to the original plan." Hearing the word money, Nyala closed her eyes. The pieces she had found in the previous chapter now fit into a complete picture. The motive, the plan, the small actions she had suspected all this time, everything pointed to a single point. Her life was the target. Kalen lowered his voice. Nyala had to lean in more to hear. "Don't worry. I won't give her time to do anything. I'll make sure of that. I just have to find another way. Another way. Nyala felt the skin on her arms prickle. That word wasn't a simple plan, it was a clear threat. Kaylin didn't sound like her husband anymore. He sounded like someone calculating possibilities, looking for loopholes, and ensuring his plan didn't fail again. After a few seconds of silence, Kaylin let out a long sigh. Yes, tomorrow or the day after. I'll call you when I finish. The word finish made Nyala shudder. She swallowed hard and backed away quickly a few steps before Kaylin hung up. She held her breath until her chest hurt. If Kaylin had come out and she had still been in the hallway, everything would have been ruined. Nyala went back to the living room and sat down, pretending to look at her phone. A few seconds later, the bedroom door opened. Kaylin came out with a tense face, but when his eyes met Nyala's, he forced a small smile. "You haven't gone to bed yet?" he asked. Nyala shook her head. "I'm not tired yet. I'm going to rest a bit." Kaylin went to the fridge and took out a bottle of water. Nyala watched his every move, the way he breathed, the way he avoided looking at her too long, the way his fingers trembled slightly. Everything confirmed one thing to her. Kaylin was executing a grand plan and feared it would fail again. Nyala said nothing, just smiled weakly. "Honey, tomorrow I want to go see your mom for a while," she said, trying to make it sound natural. "Ah, yes," Kaylin replied dryly, neither an objection nor a question, and that was precisely what convinced Nyala even more. Kaylin was so focused on another plan that he wasn't paying attention to trivial details. That night, after Kaylin went into the bedroom first, Nyala stayed in the living room. She hugged a small cushion and felt a slight tremor in her fingertips, not from simple fear, but from the realization that it was no longer safe to live in that house. Every corner of the house seemed like a trap, every object a threat, and every breath of Kaylin's sounded like a countdown. She closed her eyes and made a decision inside herself. She had to move faster than Kaylin. She had to seek protection, and she had to do it without her husband noticing. Because after that conversation, Nyala knew one thing for certain. If she stayed still, she wouldn't survive. That morning, Nyala got up earlier than usual. Her mind was still full of the voices from the previous night. Kaylin's voice, his pressured tone, the veiled threat, and the plan he had almost carried out. Every word kept resonating in her ears. Her heart was beating hard, but her thoughts moved faster than the fear. She knew one thing. If she wanted to survive, she needed proof, not simple conjectures or hunches. She needed recordings, documents, and anything that could prove Kaylin really intended to harm her. Nyala sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her phone. She opened the voice recording app and checked that the battery was full. She couldn't afford any mistakes. First, she had to ensure the next conversation was recorded without Kaylin realizing. Second, she had to get the most important thing, the remains of the avocado smoothie that neither Mrs. Calloway nor she had drunk. She glanced at the door. Kaylin was still sleeping, looking tired and anxious. His body moved sometimes in small spasms, as if he were still trapped in the previous night's plan. Without wasting time, Nyala got up silently and opened the bedroom door without making the slightest noise. In the kitchen fridge, she still kept the glass of juice she hadn't thrown away. It was the first piece of evidence. She opened the fridge door and saw the liquid in the glass. The water and the avocado fiber had started to separate, and the smell had changed slightly, but a trace of the strange aroma that had made her suspicious the day before still remained. Nyala swallowed hard, took 2 small plastic bags from a drawer, and opened the glass. She carefully poured the smoothie liquid into each bag, leaving a little in the glass so as not to raise suspicions. She tied the bags tightly and put them in a small container she usually used to store spices. Discreet, nothing suspicious, and safe. She placed the container in the back of the fridge, behind the sauce jars and the jam. Kaylin never looked at the inside of the fridge in that much detail, so that place was relatively safe. After securing the first piece of evidence, Nyala went back to the table and picked up her phone. She had to keep her distance from Kaylin, but be close enough to capture the conversation. But first, She had to provoke Kaylin to talk about something related to his plan. She couldn't depend only on chance. She held the phone and thought, what could make him talk? Kaylin was under pressure. A person like that usually reacts when a plan goes awry. And what had twisted his plan? Mrs. Calloway's condition. Nyala traced a strategy. Half an hour later, when Kaylin woke up, his heavy steps headed to the kitchen. He seemed not to have slept well, probably thinking about a plan that was becoming more and more urgent. Nyala received him with a faint smile. She shouldn't show fear. "Honey," she said in a low voice while preparing hot tea, "I'm worried about your mom. I had a nightmare last night." Kaylin stopped. His face tensed slightly. "What dream?" Nyala sighed as if containing anxiety. "I dreamed her condition worsened. I think we have to talk." Kaylin didn't answer immediately. Nyala placed the phone on the table with the screen facing down as if she had left it randomly, but actually, she had pressed the record button a while ago. "Nyala," Kaylin said with a grave voice, "I'm very stressed right now. Don't complicate things more for me." Just in that tone, Nyala knew she had struck a nerve. "Baby, if something happens to your mother, it won't be my fault, right?" Kaylin's body tensed. "What do you mean?" "The smoothie," Nyala said, holding her breath and making her words sound natural. "It's just that I'm afraid you'll misunderstand it." Kaylin pulled up a chair and sat down. His attitude went from defensive to cautious. "You said she drank it herself," he said. "Yes," Nyala replied softly. "But lately you seem different, honey. I'm afraid you're hiding something." Nyala read that change. She knew Kaylin was debating whether to speak or not. The pressure of his plan, Mrs. Calloway's condition, everything was frustrating him more and more, and a frustrated person often makes verbal mistakes. Kaylin said slowly, "Sometimes you think too much." Nyala didn't reply. She just looked at him, pretending to wait for an explanation, although she was actually preparing every second of that recording as evidence. "The important thing," continued Kaylin, "is that we don't create new problems. Yesterday caused me enough headaches. Everything should have gone according to the plan." That phrase, "according to the plan," was instantly registered in the recording. Her heart was beating hard, but her face remained serene. "Honey, what plan do you have?" Nyala asked, pretending confusion. Kaylin realized immediately he had spoken too much. "I don't want to say, well, the financial plan, the family plan, those things." He got up quickly, drank water, and left the kitchen without continuing the conversation. But for Nyala, his words had already been enough. Incomplete, but enough to prove that Kaylin was carrying out something he called the plan. After Kaylin went into the bathroom, Nyala picked up the phone and stopped the recording. She saved it with an ambiguous name like Audio Day 10. Then she went to the fridge and checked that the smoothie samples were safe. After making sure everything was in its place, she realized something. She had started moving, she had started gathering evidence, she had started planning her steps, but most importantly, she had started fighting back. And from that moment on, there was no turning back. If Nyala wanted to survive, she had to think continuously several steps ahead of Kaylin. Now the house had turned into a silent battlefield. That afternoon, the air in the living room of Nyala's house felt calmer than hours before. The panic over Mrs. Calloway's sudden fainting had passed, and now the atmosphere was beginning to settle. The doctor who had examined her via video call said Mrs. Calloway's condition was stable and that it was only due to physical exhaustion and accumulated stress. But despite that, Nyala couldn't avoid the worry. She was sitting in a corner of the sofa observing Mrs. Calloway, who was opening her eyes slowly. Her eyelids fluttered, and finally she looked around. Her breathing was slow, like someone who has just returned from a long trip. "Mama!" Nyala called her, almost in a whisper. Mrs. Calloway blinked. "Nyala, where am I?" she asked in a low, hoarse voice. "In our house, Mama. You fainted when you were about to leave. I got really scared, Nyala replied without hiding her relief. Mrs. Calloway took a few seconds to remember what happened. She massaged her temples with an expression of deep confusion. "Oh, why did I faint like that?" she murmured, more to herself. "I just felt a little dizzy." Nyala shook her head. "Mama, it's because you're very tired. Since yesterday, I noticed you were very worried." Mrs. Calloway smiled weakly, a smile that seemed more to reassure others than to comfort herself. She leaned back on the sofa cushion, took a deep breath, and exhaled heavily. "Sorry, I've been a bother," she said quietly. "Mama, don't say that. On the contrary, I'm the one who is worried. You are like a mother to me." Mrs. Calloway's gaze softened. There was warmth in it, but also sadness. Perhaps a mixture of gratitude and guilt she had been keeping for a long time. After a brief silence, Nyala decided to ask the question she had been holding back. "Mama, what were you really thinking about? Why do you seem so overwhelmed? Is it because of Kaylin?" At the question, Mrs. Calloway fell silent. Her hands, which were playing with the edge of the blanket, stopped. She lowered her head slowly. "Nyala, I've kept many things to myself. Maybe I've trusted too much that Kaylin would change one day." Nyala swallowed hard. "Change, Mama?" Mrs. Calloway nodded weakly. "Yes, since he was little, Kaylin has been a smart boy, but he has always had a character trait that scared me. Ambition, not a healthy ambition, but that kind that makes him feel he always has to be above others." Nyala listened attentively. This information didn't totally surprise her, but she didn't know Kaylin's character had manifested so young. "Before," continued Mrs. Calloway, "if he participated in a competition and didn't win, he would get angry for days, not out of disappointment with the result, but because he didn't accept there was someone better than him. His father said he would get over it, but it wasn't like that." Nyala lowered her head. Some incidents she had lived through during her courtship with Kaylin began to make more sense. The way he treated people he considered inferior, his manner of making decisions unilaterally, his need for attention. Everything seemed to stem from a root cultivated over a long time. "So you've been suffering alone all this time?" Nyala asked quietly. Mrs. Calloway sketched a smile, this time more bitter. "If I say all this is my fault, it's probably true. I've closed my eyes too many times. I thought his ambition could be channeled in a good direction, that he just needed a little guidance, but it has gotten worse." Nyala continued slowly. "Yes," Mrs. Calloway nodded weakly. "Especially after adolescence, he started feeling he always had to be superior, and as an adult, he learned he could get anything simply by imposing himself." A feeling of bitterness brushed Nyala's heart, but she kept calm. She knew it wasn't a matter of blaming, but of understanding. "Mama, it's true that Kaylin has put me through difficult moments," Nyala said softly. "But I have never blamed you." Mrs. Calloway looked at her, sincerely moved by those words. "Thank you, child. I have always feared you would suffer because of his character, but hearing you tell me this reassures me." Nyala's heart clenched, but she smiled. "If I'm honest with you," Mrs. Calloway continued, "earlier I fainted not only from exhaustion. I was terrified by the idea that you would have to go through what you told me about again, and I didn't want to be the cause." Nyala took Mrs. Calloway's hand and wrapped it gently. "You will never be the cause. You have always been by my side, and that is more than enough." Mrs. Calloway's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "You are a good girl, Nyala. If Kaylin were like you, even just half—" "I'm sorry, Mama, but I think everyone has their own path. Kaylin, too. I just hope one day he realizes that life doesn't consist of beating others." Mrs. Calloway nodded. "I hope so, too." Silence fell again, but this time it felt more peaceful. There wasn't the same tension as before. It was a moment of understanding between two people who had repressed their feelings for a long time. Nyala arranged Mrs. Calloway's blanket and stood up silently. "Mama, rest a little. I'll make you some hot tea." Mrs. Calloway smiled softly. "Thank you, child." While Nyala headed to the kitchen, Mrs. Calloway followed her with her gaze. With misty eyes, she felt a relief she hadn't experienced in a long time. Perhaps, she thought, it was the first time she spoke about Kaylin with sincerity, without fear, and for some reason, for the first time, she felt hope. Not for Kaylin, but for herself, for a quieter life, without carrying a weight she could no longer be responsible for. When the sky began to darken, Nyala arrived at the door of her house. The porch light was on, but the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. She took a deep breath before opening the door, trying to compose herself after the long conversation with Mrs. Calloway, which had left her emotionally exhausted. Upon entering, the house was in a state of impeccable order, too impeccable. The chairs in the living room seemed arranged with millimeter precision, and the TV remote was placed vertically on the table. And Kaylin was sitting on the sofa with his back straight and hands clasped over his chest. His own posture seemed a sign he was waiting for her. Not a calm wait, but a wait with something darker. Kaylin's gaze rose slowly when Nyala closed the door. "You're late," he said dryly. He wasn't angry, but cold. Nyala swallowed. "It's just that your mom fainted, and that's why—" "She fainted," Kaylin interrupted her. His eyebrows arched slightly, but not out of worry, but rather a curiosity full of suspicion. "You told me you were going to walk her home, not that she had fainted." Nyala opened her mouth, but the words got stuck. Kaylin already had a series of questions prepared. She saw it in his look. "I mean, she got dizzy suddenly, so I brought her to our house so she could rest a bit. She's better now." Kaylin didn't answer immediately. He looked at her for a few seconds, as if weighing whether he could believe what she was telling him. Just with that atmosphere, the air felt heavy, as if a thin blanket of pressure had been spread between them. "You look nervous," he said finally. His voice was low. "Are you hiding something?" Nyala tried to keep calm. "No, honey." Kaylin smiled weakly, a smile that never appeared unless he felt superior to others. "You know I don't like you lying to me, honey. Why didn't you call me as soon as she fainted?" Kaylin tilted his head. "Or did you want me not to find out on purpose?" Nyala's heart raced, but she tried to keep her tone of voice steady. "In that moment, I didn't react. I was completely focused on helping her. Besides, I thought you'd be busy." Kaylin stood up. His movements were slow. It wasn't a physical threat, but enough for Nyala to feel the space around her shrinking. "On the contrary, if something happens, you should tell me first," he said, approaching. "I'm your husband. It's normal that I want to know what happens to our family." His words sounded reasonable, but the pressure they contained was subtle, but very clear. The implicit message was evident. It is I who must know everything first, and if not, it is wrong. Nyala backed away half a step unconsciously. "Baby, I'm not hiding anything," she repeated in a low voice. "I'm just tired." "Tired?" Kaylin suppressed a small laugh. "Lately you're tired often." Nyala lowered her head. She knew it wasn't a comment, but a skillfully disguised accusation. Kaylin examined her face, and then threw a question that silenced her. "Did you talk about me?" The question was sharp. It wasn't loud, but it was like a blow to the chest. Kaylin was now only a step away from her, close enough to feel the tension in the air. "Honey, we just had a normal conversation." "A normal conversation," repeated Kaylin. His voice was calm, but equally piercing. "I know her. My mother likes to exaggerate everything that has to do with me. Surely she told you things." "No, honey," Nyala replied quickly. Too quickly. And Kaylin caught it. This time, he smiled more weakly and more dangerously. You know, Nyala? I can feel something is wrong. You came home with a different face, as if you knew something I don't know. Nyala sighed, trying to think clearly. She didn't want that night to end in a huge fight. I'm just worried about your mom. That's all, honey. Don't imagine things. Kaylin looked at her fixedly for a long time, as if trying to read her thoughts just with his gaze. All right, he said finally, stepping back a little. If you say so, I'll believe you. But Nyala knew Kaylin said it not because he really believed her, but to make her feel she was still under surveillance. He wanted to show her he knew many things, even if he didn't really know anything. Kaylin headed to the table, picked up an empty glass, and without turning said, Tomorrow, before going anywhere, tell me first. I don't want this to happen again. The tone wasn't loud, but very binding, like a new rule inserted suddenly into the house routine. A rule not discussed, only proclaimed. Nyala squeezed her fingers. Okay, honey. We have to trust each other, added Kaylin while filling the glass with water. And for that, you have to always be honest with me. The atmosphere in the house became even quieter. The TV was on without sound, and the living room lights seemed sharper, and Nyala stood in the middle of the room with an increasingly suffocating sensation. Kaylin sat back down, but this time he turned on the TV sound as if everything were fine. Come and sit. Stay a while with me. Nyala walked slowly. Every step felt heavy. She sat at the end of the sofa, keeping her distance, but not so far as to raise more suspicions. They looked at the TV screen without really seeing it. Kaylin looked at her out of the corner of his eye from time to time, often enough so Nyala couldn't breathe easily. There were no screams or extreme actions, but the pressure was more real than anything else. And that night, for the first time, Nyala realized how silent a house can sound when the silence is full of fear. That morning the air felt heavier than usual. Nyala was sitting in a hospital waiting chair, moving her hands non-stop, restless, not because of the cold, but because her mind was full of all the bad possibilities. She hadn't slept well all night. She had only closed her eyes, alert so Kaylin wouldn't notice her change in attitude. The smoothie sample she had secretly saved was finally analyzed in the hospital lab with Dr. Sterling's permission, and that morning they had called her to give her the results. The doctor's office door opened slowly, and Dr. Sterling came out indicating to Nyala with a small gesture to enter. Nyala got up, straightened her clothes, and entered with her chest increasingly tight. The room was quiet and simple. Medical files were organized on the shelves, and a slight smell of medical alcohol permeated the air. Dr. Sterling was seated behind his desk. His face was serious, but not tense. Rather, he looked like someone choosing his words carefully. "Sit down, Mrs. Nyala," he said. Nyala sat down slowly. In front of her was a blue folder already open. In that folder, undoubtedly, were the results that had made Dr. Sterling call her specifically. "Doctor, did the results arrive?" Nyala's voice trembled slightly. Dr. Sterling nodded silently. "Yes, they arrived. I wanted to explain them to you myself, so there are no misunderstandings." He turned the folder and showed her the first page containing a table and lab records. "A chemical component has been detected that shouldn't be in a homemade drink," he said with a restrained voice. "The amount isn't high, but it's enough to cause dizziness, nausea, and even loss of consciousness in some people." Nyala felt a chill on the back of her neck. "So, is it poison?" Dr. Sterling didn't answer immediately. He interlaced his hands on the desk and looked at Nyala very cautiously. "Medically, that substance is classified as a mild poison. A single intake isn't fatal, but it is dangerous if administered repeatedly." Nyala felt her knees buckle. She grabbed the edge of the chair so it wouldn't show she was shaking. "Doctor, and my mother-in-law, her fainting was because of that?" "It is very likely," replied Dr. Sterling. "The symptoms your mother-in-law presented match the effects of that substance, especially, as you told me, after drinking that smoothie, right?" Nyala nodded weakly. Her throat felt dry. For a moment there was silence. Only the sound of the air conditioning was heard faintly, and Nyala dared to ask, "If the original target was me, is it possible I didn't feel the symptoms because I didn't drink it?" Dr. Sterling wasn't surprised by the question. He already sensed the direction of Nyala's worries. "We can assume so," he said softly. "If someone prepared that drink for you and you didn't ingest it, you wouldn't have presented symptoms. But Mrs. Nyala, you shouldn't jump to conclusions. Evidence must be gathered properly." Nyala took a deep breath. "Understood, doctor." "Good." Dr. Sterling handed her the blue folder. "This is a copy of the analysis results. Keep it well. If you feel you still aren't sure, don't show it to anyone." Nyala took the folder with both hands. It felt heavier than it actually was. Inside wasn't just a lab report, but the confirmation of a fact she had been fearing in silence all this time. Dr. Sterling continued, "I know the situation can be difficult, but you must keep calm. Don't act rashly." Nyala nodded. "I won't be reckless." "If you plan to take legal action," added Dr. Sterling, "you will need strong evidence, not just lab results. Keep the recording you brought me and the smoothie sample safe, and let no one know you are gathering evidence." His voice remained professional, without sermonizing or getting carried away by emotions. He spoke like a doctor who wants to ensure his patient is safe, both physically and mentally. "Mrs. Nyala," he said again more softly, "do you feel safe at home?" At that question, Nyala fell silent. She wanted to answer yes, but the reality was different. Since that night when Kaylin started showing excessive suspicion about her every move, she hadn't felt safe. "Sometimes." "No," Nyala replied in a low voice. "That is the most important thing now," said Dr. Sterling. "Your anxiety could make the person you live with suspicious. Act normally, and if the situation worsens, contact me. As your family doctor, I will help you in any way I can." That sentence wasn't a heroic promise or a dramatic rescue. It was simply the professional commitment of a doctor staying within the limits of his function. Nyala nodded, feeling slightly comforted. "Thank you, doctor. I really appreciate all this help." "Take it easy, Mrs. Nyala, so as not to put yourself in danger." Nyala got up, took a deep breath, and put the blue folder in her purse before arranging it. When she opened the office door, she felt a different emotion inside her, a mixture of fear, relief, and courage born of a bitter reality. She left the office, and for the first time since all this began, she knew one thing for certain. The truth was no longer a guess. Now she had the proof in her hands, and the next step had to be taken very carefully. That afternoon, the sky seemed melancholic, as if accompanying Nyala's mood, who was sitting in her room looking at the blue folder with the lab results. Sunlight barely sneaked through the cracks in the curtains, leaving the room dark and full of inexplicable pressure. For the first time since living with Kaylin, that room seemed like a strange place. She closed the folder slowly and left it on a small desk in a corner of the room. Right next to it was the phone with the recording of Kaylin's conversation, the one she had secretly recorded a few nights ago, and in the drawer below, she kept the insurance policy in her name. If something happened to her, a huge sum of money would automatically go to Kaylin. These three pieces of evidence, the recording, the documents, and the analysis results, were the basis of the actions she was going to take. Nyala reviewed all the documents again, making sure everything was perfect. She knew a single mistake could ruin the whole plan, or worse, put her in inescapable danger. She turned on the phone and listened to Kaylin's voice recording again. Every sentence she heard made her hair stand on end. Kaylin's voice was cold, calculating, and showed no remorse. The phrase, "I just have to wait for the right moment," resonated in her ears, like a reminder that time was not on her side. Nyala turned off the recording. She didn't want to hear any more, but she had to remember it all. She took out a small note she had hidden behind the curtain folds. There she had noted some key points. The time Kaylin had spoken to someone on the phone, the moment his attitude had changed, the smoothie attempt, and the moment Mrs. Calloway had fainted. The note wasn't a simple summary, but a timeline that would be strong evidence if Nyala presented it to the authorities later. But it wasn't the time yet, not yet. Nyala had to wait for the right moment when Kaylin wouldn't have a chance to turn the situation around. At sunset, Nyala left the room with a normal attitude. She had learned to keep her expression neutral, but calm, as if she weren't hiding anything important. Kaylin, who was watching TV in the living room, turned immediately when Nyala passed. "Have you been in the room the whole time?" Kaylin asked, with a voice that sounded light, but Nyala could detect the falseness behind it. "Yes, I was just tired," Nyala replied with a small smile. "I didn't rest well at the hospital either." Kaylin nodded and looked back at the TV screen. "You're not working tomorrow?" "Not for now. I have to sort out some things related to my mom." He murmured. That brief response was what gave Nyala the certainty that Kaylin was watching her every move, but strangely he didn't ask anything else, as if he wanted to ensure Nyala didn't suspect his plan. Nyala went to the kitchen and pretended to prepare a drink. Actually, she just wanted to observe Kaylin's behavior from afar. After days of tension, she had begun to recognize a pattern. When Kaylin was silent for too long, it meant he was planning a new step. But that night, Kaylin's face was very relaxed, too relaxed. And that was precisely what put her even more on alert. She returned to the living room with a glass of water. "Honey, do you want water?" she asked with a normal voice. "No," Kaylin replied without turning. Every small interaction that night, Nyala recorded in her memory. She had to make Kaylin feel that everything was proceeding normally, that she was still under his control, that she was still the wife who didn't suspect her husband. But the reality was, she was planning an invisible war, and she was determined to win it. As the night progressed, Nyala went back into the room, turned on the table lamp, and took a deep breath. In front of the drawer was a small bag she had prepared specially to keep all the evidence. Carefully, she put in the analysis results from the blue folder. The voice recording backed up on a USB drive, the insurance policy, and the timeline note she had written. She hid the bag under a pile of old clothes Kaylin almost never touched. "This isn't enough," Nyala whispered to herself. She picked up her phone and activated additional lock settings, a new PIN, a new pattern, and the evidence files hidden in a secret folder. She even made a backup to an email she only accessed from a safe place. She couldn't take any risks. Nyala's grand plan was simple, but very meticulous. 1. Gather perfect evidence. 2. Wait for Mrs. Calloway's condition to stabilize so she could be a key witness. 3. Present all evidence to the authorities when Kaylin wasn't home. 4. Ensure she was in a safe place before Kaylin realized everything. She wrote down each step on a small paper, tore it into several pieces, and threw it in the trash in the backyard. No trace should remain. Near midnight, Nyala heard Kaylin's steps approaching. She quickly turned off the table lamp and lay down, pretending to sleep. The bedroom door opened slowly. Kaylin stood in the doorway, observing Nyala. His breathing was quiet, but it felt like surveillance. Nyala kept the rhythm of her breathing stable. She held herself back from moving a muscle. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, Kaylin closed the door and walked away. At that moment, Nyala opened her eyes. She knew the moment was close. One step remained for the truth to come to light, and she had to ensure Kaylin didn't have time to realize he was falling into a trap. That morning, the house was quieter than usual. Nyala got up early, not out of anxiety, but because today was the end point of a long journey she had traveled in silence. All the evidence was prepared in a small bag she had kept under the bed during the night. The recording, the analysis results, the insurance policy, and the timeline note were there, organized and perfect. She stood for a moment in front of the mirror, ensuring her face showed no fear. Today, she had to look as serene and firm as possible. Whatever happened, she couldn't waver. When she left the room, Kaylin was sitting in the dining room looking at his phone screen. His face showed no suspicion, or perhaps he was too sure everything was still under his control. "Honey," Nyala called him with a serene voice. Kaylin turned. "Yes, what is it?" "We have to talk." Nyala's tone this time was different. firmer, but without raising suspicions. Kaylin's eyebrows arched slightly. "About what?" "In front of your mother," Nyala replied. Kaylin stayed silent for a moment, as if thinking. "About my mother. Why? What's wrong?" "Yes, and also about that smoothie." Kaylin's chest rose and fell a little faster, but he tried to look calm and smiled slightly. "Drop it already, Nyala. That's in the past." "No, honey," Nyala replied, looking directly at him. "I have proof." Hearing the word proof, Kaylin's face changed. For the first time since all this began, he looked truly surprised. But Nyala didn't give him time to make excuses. She turned toward Mrs. Calloway's room, and Kaylin had no choice but to follow her. Mrs. Calloway still looked weak, but she could sit up in bed. When Nyala entered, she smiled slightly at her, but the smile disappeared seeing Kaylin enter a few steps behind. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Calloway asked in a low voice. Nyala sat next to her, opened the small bag she was carrying, and without grand words, took out the evidence one by one. She put the analysis results from the blue folder on Mrs. Calloway's knees. The USB drive with the recording of Kaylin's conversation she left on a small table. She unfolded the insurance policy, showing the suspicious page. Kaylin stood stiffly a few steps from them. "Nyala, you can't suspect lightly like this." "I don't suspect lightly," Nyala replied. "All this is proof." Mrs. Calloway picked up the blue folder with trembling hands, read a few lines, and her look changed to one of surprise, pain, and disbelief. "Kaylin, is this true?" Kaylin opened his mouth, but no words came out. Nyala continued with a calm but clear voice. "Mama, that poison wasn't an accident. It was planned. The target was me. Only you drank it first." Mrs. Calloway covered her mouth to contain a sob. She turned toward her son, the look of a mother who seemed more hurt than by any word. "Answer, Kaylin." Her voice was trembling. "What does all this mean? Did you really try to hurt your wife?" Kaylin breathed with difficulty. His face went pale. He massaged his forehead as if trying to deny everything. But when Nyala played the recording from her phone and Kaylin's voice, speaking clearly of the plan and the right moment, filled the room, there was no room for lies anymore. He lowered his head. His shoulders sank like someone who can no longer deny a reality, pointing directly at him. "I couldn't help it, Mama," Kaylin said in a low voice. "I needed the money. I had to finish everything fast." "You couldn't help it?" Mrs. Calloway interrupted him with a sharp, though weak, voice. "What kind of son are you? Money is more important than your wife's life?" Kaylin covered his face with his hands. "I didn't know what to do." Nyala looked at him without excessive hatred. There was sadness, a sense of loss, but not explosive rage. She had already passed that phase in the last few weeks. Now only firmness remained to save herself. "Honey," Nyala said in a low voice, "listen to this well. I am not going to live in this house anymore. I have prepared everything. I want my life and my safety back." Kaylin looked at Nyala with red eyes. He wanted to approach, but Nyala's expression stopped him. It wasn't hatred, but the clarity that there was nothing left to fix. "Nyala, can I explain everything?" he pleaded. "No, Kaylin," Nyala replied with a soft but firm voice. "There are things that can't be fixed just with explanations." Mrs. Calloway cried, not from pain, but from the reality that her son had become someone she no longer recognized. "Kaylin, do you shame me?" Nyala got up, put her things in the bag, ensuring all the evidence was well closed. Kaylin took half a step toward her, but stopped when Nyala raised her hand slightly in a stop sign. "I am going to present this evidence to the proper authorities," she said. "But first, I'm leaving. I need space to breathe." Nobody stopped her. Nyala left the room, left the house, and when the door closed behind her back, she felt as if she were taking the first breath of air after having been underwater for a long time. The sky, unlike the tension lived inside the house, seemed clear. The afternoon breeze caressed her face gently, as if congratulating her for the courage to take a difficult but important step. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes it takes the courage to leave behind what almost kills us to be able to reconnect with the life God has kept for us." With a firm step, Nyala left her past behind and opened the door to a more peaceful future. In life, honesty always finds its way, and the courage to choose one's own safety is the greatest form of gratitude for the life we have been given. Thank you for accompanying Nyala to the end of her journey. I hope this story has left you with the lesson that inner peace, although sometimes it feels heavy, comes from the value of making the right decisions. If you liked this story and want to keep watching other dramatic stories, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes.